There are movies that truly end when the words "the end" appear on the screen. But there are also movies that seem to never leave pop culture, and Scarface 1983 is exactly one of them. More than 40 years have passed, and Tony Montana still appears on t-shirts, posters, in music, video games, and countless conversations about the greatest anti-heroes on screen. Interestingly, this enduring vitality does not only come from the immortal lines or the fierce ending. It is also created by a series of behind-the-scenes stories that most of the audience has never known. What I always like about Scarface is the feeling that everything in the film is somewhat dangerous and hard to control. When looking into the production process, I realized that feeling was not accidental. Many memorable moments were born from unexpected accidents, bold decisions, on-set improvisations, and the risks that the film crew accepted to create a work unlike any gangster movie before it. In the video today, we will go back in time together to explore 15 behind-the-scenes secrets, unintended incidents, and little-known details that contributed to turning Scarface from a controversial movie upon its release into a cinematic legend that is still talked about to this very day. Fake drugs left real consequences for Al Pacino. Remember the cinematic era of the 1980s? At that time, Hollywood had no CGI magic to add to the frames. Everything on set had to be staged manually and as raw as possible. When watching Scarface, we are all strongly impressed by the giant mountains of cocaine on Tony's desk. However, the behind-the-scenes secret contains a heartbreaking story. That white powder was actually a mixture of baby milk powder and laxatives. To bring the audience a wild and authentic Tony Montana, Al Pacino had to directly inhale this powder continuously for months. That selfless dedication left a permanent scar. The massive amount of artificial powder severely damaged the actor's nasal passages. Even decades later, he still often struggles with respiratory issues caused by this very classic role. Thinking about it, we appreciate even more the silent sacrifice of the veteran generations of actors. Behind a timeless cinematic masterpiece is not only glory, but sometimes the trade-off of physical health, a deeply human testament to ultimate dedication to art. The spectacular trick with the censorship board. The 80s was a period when the censorship boundaries of the Motion Picture Association of America were still extremely strict. When Scarface was just completed, the film was doused with a cold bucket of water when it was labeled X 3 times, a strict classification that was almost exclusively reserved for pornography. For director Brian De Palma, this work was flesh and blood, his spiritual child that he could not watch being cut. Through tireless efforts, he invited real anti-drug experts to testify, affirming the authenticity of the underworld in the film and successfully convinced the board to lower it to an R rating. But the real shock lies in the very bold move that followed. Driven by the self-respect of an artist who craves for the audience to experience his original vision, De Palma secretly sent the original cut, without any trimming, to the theaters. He bet that the executives at Universal would not notice the difference, and in fact, no one detected the swap. That recklessness was not just an impulsive trick. It represented the courageous spirit of filmmakers of that time, people who dared to bet their entire careers to protect the most authentic art to send to us, the audience. Sen. Al Pacino was badly burned, the set had to be closed. Mentioning the final scene of Scarface, we all remember the image of Tony Montana frantically firing his little friend. It is one of the most explosive moments in film history. However, few know that the price paid for that perfection was real sweat and blood. While too immersed, after firing over 30 blank rounds, Al Pacino accidentally gripped the glowing red barrel of the M16 rifle. The immense heat caused the skin on his hand to stick to the metal, causing severe burns to the extent that the set had to be completely closed for 2 weeks. Looking back at this incident, we do not just see a simple occupational accident, but also feel the intense, burning dedication of the artists of the previous generation. They were willing to trade their own physical safety to bring us legendary frames, proving an era of filmmaking full of passion and disregard for danger. The real photo of the cocaine coup. When drug lord Alejandro Sosa shows Tony the portrait of General Cochambre, most of us probably assume that it was just a carefully prepared cinematic prop. But the truth hidden behind that frame carries a terrifying historical weight. That photo was completely real, taken of Luis Arce Gomez, a real Bolivian colonel who was the mastermind behind the bloody cocaine coup in real life in the early 80s. When knowing this detail, the boundary between film and real life seems to blur. The film does not just paint a fictional underworld, but it is also in direct dialogue with the cruel events of the era. This further highlights the depth of the filmmaker's thinking. They skillfully integrated pieces of painful history into entertainment, forcing us, the mature audience, to reflect more deeply on the reality full of hidden corners. Woo. Only one actor was truly Cuban. There is a fact that clearly reflects the way of working of old Hollywood. Although Scarface is a tragic epic about Cuban refugees in the United States, in reality, Stephen Bauer, who played Manny, was the only lead actor with true Cuban blood. Other prominent faces, including Al Pacino, were mostly Italian Americans or came from other cultures. This detail brings a very special emotion. Bauer became the cultural anchor for the whole crew, helping Al Pacino hone his dialect and grasp the true soul of those living far from home. Looking back, we do not blame the lack of casting in Hollywood at that time. On the contrary, this highlights the extraordinary acting talent of the actors, as well as the quiet but invaluable role of Bauer in keeping the cultural heartbeat of the film alive and authentic. Leo. Al Pacino once extremely disliked Michelle Pfeiffer. It is hard to imagine a Scarface without the cold, haughty, yet melancholy beauty of Elvira Hancock, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. She was the perfect rose accompanying Tony's wildness. However, few know that Al Pacino initially strongly opposed giving this role to her. At that time, Pfeiffer was just an unknown actress. Pacino had expected famous stars of the time like Glenn Close, Carrie Fisher, or Sharon Stone. Fortunately, producer Martin Bregman saw a special aura in this young girl and firmly defended his decision to the end. Looking back at this behind-the-scenes story, we learn a profound human lesson about faith. Without Bregman's persistence and Pfeiffer's extraordinary efforts to break stereotypes, we would have lost one of the most seductive and iconic performances of the 80s. C. Michelle Pfeiffer made Al Pacino bleed for real. Looking back at the early 80s, Michelle Pfeiffer was not yet the famous silver screen star that we know and love today. At that time, she was just a young actress eager to prove herself, carrying extreme tension when stepping into the audition room for the role of Elvira Hancock, facing a big name like Al Pacino. And then, an unimaginable incident happened. In a moment of being too immersed in the tension of the scene, Michelle broke a glass. A shard flew out and accidentally cut Al Pacino's hand, causing blood to flow. Try putting yourself in that young girl's shoes at that time. She was convinced that she had ruined everything, and that the door to her career had just slammed shut because she had injured the main star of the film. However, the magic of art lies in those raw and unpolished moments. It was the wildness, intensity, and absolute authenticity of that moment that completely convinced Al Pacino and director Brian De Palma. From an accident that seemed like a disaster, Hollywood found a perfect, cold, yet attractive Elvira. Sometimes, it is the risks and those very human moments of anxiety that are the source of an immortal icon on screen. The terrifying chainsaw scene was a real case. If you ever sat in front of a blurry CRT television to watch Scarface on some late night, you surely cannot forget the scene at the motel in Miami. The roaring sound of the chainsaw became one of the moments that made our hearts stop, one of the most haunting marks in film history. Most of us once thought it was just a Hollywood exaggeration to push the drama and fear to a climax. But the truth always has a way of making us shiver. Behind those frames is a heartbreakingly cruel reality. Screenwriter Oliver Stone, in an effort to fully understand the underworld, went on a field trip with the Drug Enforcement Administration. It was there that he accidentally read a real murder file about a kingpin using a chainsaw to eliminate a snitch. This discovery gives us a deeper and heavier perspective on the film. It is not simply violence for entertainment, but a raw reflection of the fierce war on drugs of the 80s. When knowing this, we admire even more the courage of filmmakers like Stone, who dared to walk straight into the darkness of real life to bring the audience the most authentic and original work of art. Joe. The script was written during a real drug addiction. Mentioning Scarface, we often praise the brilliant performance of Al Pacino or the direction of Brian De Palma. But the true soul of the film was molded from an incredibly painful inner struggle. The great screenwriter Oliver Stone penned this masterpiece while he himself was struggling with the devastating cocaine addiction of the 80s. To save himself and keep his pen sober, Stone made a landmark decision to fly all the way to Paris. By completely isolating himself from the temptations of America, he turned his solitary rehabilitation into an artistic cleansing. Every craving, every deep anger and despair of his was poured into the shape of Tony Montana. This story makes us feel heavy-hearted when looking back. The madness and tragedy of Tony Montana on screen are not entirely fictional. They are the cries for help, and also the liberation of the person who created him. It proves a profound human truth. Sometimes, the greatest and most touching works are molded from the most shattered pieces of the artist's soul. Sure, Steven Spielberg was a secret guest director. The 80s was the golden age of friendship and connection between great filmmakers. You might not believe it, but in that very classic bloody shootout at the end of the film, another magic hand intervened. The famous director Steven Spielberg, who was visiting his friend Brian De Palma, was given the seat to personally direct a shot. It was the dramatic low-angle shot when the Colombian assassins used grappling hooks to break into the mansion. It is so warm to imagine the two legendary directors standing next to each other, sharing a common artistic vision without any jealousy or ego. This small detail not only enriches the legacy of Scarface, but also reminds us of a Hollywood era filled with respect and camaraderie, where true art is always placed first. Cherie, being banned by the city of Miami. Whenever admiring Scarface, the sun-drenched sand dunes and bustling streets always make us believe that we are breathing the air of Miami. But the truth is, almost the entire film had to be shot in Los Angeles. The reason? The Miami Tourism Board flatly banned the crew. At that time, they were extremely afraid that the raw story of Tony Montana's gang and drugs would ruin the city's image and scare tourists away. This gives us a very interesting perspective on the irony of time. Today, Scarface is one of the greatest cultural symbols associated with Miami. It shows how excellent the filmmakers were at recreating the soul of a city from thousands of miles away, and also proves that authentic works, even if once rejected, will eventually confirm their immortal value. Shar. The heart-stopping incident with a 200-kilogram tiger. Do you remember the scene where Tony Montana strolls through his luxurious mansion with a wild pet? The original script depicted a black panther, but due to a logistics error, a giant Bengal tiger weighing over 200 kilograms appeared. Instead of canceling, the team decided to go big and keep it. But wild nature is never easily tamed. In a tense scene, the tiger actually went crazy and almost bit a cameraman. That heart-stopping moment caused a real panic on set. Today, with the help of computer graphics, such risks seem to no longer exist. Recalling this story makes us even more amazed at the recklessness and authenticity of 80s cinema. The actors and the crew actually bet their lives to create magic on screen. Shasen? Tony Montana was never called Scarface in English. Have you ever sat and pondered a very interesting irony of cinema? For nearly 3 hours immersed in the suffocating underworld of Miami, the name Scarface, the legendary title of the film, was never spoken in English even once. Yes, you did not hear that wrong. Throughout the work, this nickname appeared only once in Spanish, Cara Cicatriz. Spoken from the mouth of the assassin Hector the Toad, this discovery truly makes us smile with delight. Director Brian De Palma was so subtle that he did not need to force that name into the audience's mind. Instead, he let the scar deep on Tony's face and his damaged ego tell the story themselves. It reminds us of a delicate cinematic era where icons were built from the character's core, not from empty self-proclamations. Shasu! Robert De Niro and John Travolta were almost the boss. Try closing your eyes and imagining a parallel cinematic universe where Al Pacino was not Tony Montana. Hard to believe, right? However, the reality is that Robert De Niro was the first person invited to sit on this criminal throne, although he refused. Moreover, the rising star at that time, John Travolta, was almost the impulsive brother Manny Ribera. He even sat down with Al Pacino in 1981 to discuss the script. Looking back at these fateful turns, I cannot help but feel moved. The cinema of the 80s witnessed the intersection of the greatest acting monuments. Although De Niro or Travolta would certainly have delivered great performances, their refusal paved the way for Al Pacino and Stephen Bauer to create an immortal duo. Sometimes, pieces that accidentally slip out of our hands are the most perfect arrangements of artistic fate. Shawu, the secret technology that created giant bullet sparks. Every time we rewatch the fiery gunfights in Scarface, we always feel a fierceness, an exaggeration that is hair-raising. The secret does not lie in soulless computer effects like today, but stems from the genius mind of cinematographer John A. Alonzo. To capture the full brutality of the shooting, he manually designed a sophisticated mechanical system never seen before. He perfectly synchronized the prop gun triggers with the camera shutter. As a result, every spark flying from the gun barrel was captured at the exact moment it bloomed most brilliantly and violently. It is astonishing to think about the unlimited creativity of filmmakers of that time. They were not just storytellers, but also diligent mechanical engineers. With their hands and enthusiasm, they breathed soul into every frame, turning a pure action scene into a visually iconic, timeless painting. Ladies and gentlemen, after more than 4 decades, Scarface remains a testament that a great film is not only created by its script or acting, but also by the stories behind the camera. It is the incidents, the bold decisions, and even the moments that seemed like failures that have contributed to creating a legend that many generations continue to explore. If today you have learned at least one more thing that makes you look at Scarface from a different perspective, then this video has achieved its goal. Thank you for accompanying us, and see you again in the next cinematic journeys.